Welcome again to Elevating the Conversation. My name is Paul Reed, and it's an honor to serve as publisher of the Journal of Business. It's also an honor that so many of you each month choose to join us for these really important discussions. You know, we started Elevating the Conversation about 16 months ago because you asked us for a venue at which we could have important conversations about issues affecting our community. And we've done just that. We've had great speakers in the past year and a few months, including Stephanie Curran and Frank Velezquez and Keonta Duncan and Jim Frank, Steve Scranton, Larry Crowder, and many more. Next month, we have Chris Patterson of Hello for Good, and he'll be talking about business's role in the homelessness crisis in Spokane. And today, we're very pleased to have with us Chef Chad White of CW Hospitality Group for a discussion about running a restaurant. Without a doubt, running a restaurant is a difficult challenge at any time, but given the past 2 years of pandemic and now labor shortages and rising inflation, it's got to be extremely difficult. This ought to be a very compelling discussion. But before we get into that, let's take a quick look at some of the great speakers we've had in the last 3 months. Take a peek.
If your human resources strategies are not deeply interwoven in your business strategies, then you have a miss. You know, for us, 50% of our total spend, because we're delivering care through people, is spent on our people and related expenses. So wages, benefits, etc. And those people strategies are your business strategies these days, and you have to recognize that. And I firmly believe that the equal partnership that we have between finance, HR, and business operations is it feels very much like an equal partnership this day and age, and that's different than maybe 2 or 3 years ago.
Right now, our view is a lot of the key suppliers that we're struggling with now are being very open that they think that this is an issue that they are going to be struggling with into the first quarter of 2023, certainly, and potentially have some kind of follow-on effects after that.
Sure.
But it's manageable, right? We're managing, it's just taking more effort than normal.
Right.
And so, from our perspective, we don't really we expect this to continue to be a challenge, certainly for the remainder of this year. And again, it's not that we can't overcome it. It's just forcing us to maybe kind of deal with things differently.
Not seeing quite as many new people come into this industry because you'd have to find a building and have the expense of building the building. And there are not that many more families in Spokane that can really afford to pay what it really costs to operate.
Sure.
To the tuition. So the people getting into this industry is fewer and fewer. And so most places in Spokane need more childcare.
Most neighborhoods.
Sure. And so specifically Airway Heights, and I know especially the northeast of Spokane needs quite a bit, but even downtown, honestly, everywhere, and especially non-traditional hours.
Welcome to Elevating the Conversation. My name is Lynn Parrish. I'll be your host for the next 45 minutes or so, and I'm joined today by Chad White. Thanks, Chad.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Chad is the owner of CW Hospitality Group, contestant on Top Chef, James Beard semifinalist, probably the biggest celebrity we've had on the show since Keonta Duncan, I would guess. So,
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So, Chad, one thing I wanted to ask you about is we've seen some stories about restaurants going out of business. We've seen stories about restaurants starting. And I guess what I don't have a good sense for is what the net effect is. And I know you probably don't have any data on that, but what's your impression in terms of what we're seeing in terms of restaurant expansion or contraction in our market?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some restaurant owners or restaurateurs that have looked at this as an opportunity, right?
Sure,
We've seen businesses go out of business, quite a few here in Spokane and all over Washington and the entire country. And so for some, it's an opportunity because there's less competition. Real estate is up for grabs.
Yeah.
And people are looking for a way out. For a lot of restaurant owners, if you think about it, that have been veterans in the industry, maybe looking for that way out, and they found it by somebody buying either their business or getting them out of a lease.
Sure.
And in the same regard, you've had a very large increase in cost of living, cost of goods, labor costs are continuing to go up, and then we're having to raise our prices, and
Sure.
it's just been, it's not going in the right direction for a lot of businesses.
Right. Now you've made the decision to do both within the last year.
Yeah.
Well, within the last probably 5-6 months, right? To open a restaurant and to close a restaurant. Let's start with opening. So it's Uno Mas that's going to be opening within the next 30 days, hopefully.
Hopefully, yeah. Yeah.
And so what was the thought process behind opening that restaurant? And what's the concept?
Well, so the concept is that it's a campestre style taco shop.
Okay.
Meaning campestre meaning country, right?
Sure.
So we're out in the South Valley next to TT's. TT's is going to be involved in this project. We're going to be smoking quite a few of our meats at TT's.
Okay.
And so they're larger tacos. Think of a 6-inch taco, something that you would eat out in the field while you're farming.
Mhm.
More hearty. They're not going to be the small street tacos, which are traditionally made inexpensive for the working class.
Sure.
Right. And
Sure.
these tacos are really about getting the best bang for your buck, but at the same time, packing it with a lot of flavor and a lot larger portion size.
Sure.
So that's the concept. And it's kind of backwards from where you were asking the question, right? The
Right.
reason why Uno Mas came about was looking at High Tide Lobster Bar as being a concept when seafood prices were great. It was an incredible project.
Sure.
Right? We were very busy. There was a lot of buzz going around town. You really couldn't get lobster rolls anywhere east of Seattle. And even
Right.
then, you're getting crab. You're not getting Maine lobster,
Yeah.
right? And so there's
Crab,
this huge
CRAB.
CRAB, yes. When you look at that craze and the excitement,
Sure.
it was great. But when we opened the restaurant, our cost of goods were around $200 for 12 pounds of lobster.
Okay.
My last invoice was over $1,007.
Wow.
So you have to pass those costs or those expenses on to your consumer because you can't eat that.
Right.
And what I'm happy is our core clientele, the ones who were our big fan base, our regulars, instead of them coming once a week, now they're coming once a month, and then once a quarter, and then once a year.
I want to get back to Uno Mas, but I'm just curious to know. So you basically described a 5x increase in the cost of lobster
In 2 years.
in 2 years time period. So what did that do to the price of a roll? Did it go up 5x too? Or,
Yeah. So, well, not really 5x, right?
Okay.
But we started at $16 a lobster roll.
Mhm.
And that was absurd to a lot of people. And a lot of people were like, wow, that's a great deal. Because
Yeah.
in Maine, they're like 25. And then as our price increases would go up, we would take the heat ourselves for a minute, right?
Sure.
Because seafood futures are going up and down and
Right.
depending on the season and the catch and what's going on. So we would try to be the buffer in between the inflation until it was a settling price and it continued to go up, then we'd have to raise.
Right.
And so we try to do our best to hold back as long as we could. And a bad business move is often we held back too long.
Okay.
And then we'd have to make this large jump instead of like incrementally jumping for like $2 at a time.
Right.
We'd go from like $7 or $8 at a time.
Sure.
And so there's some good business lessons there.
Right.
But eventually you start to price out the majority of your market.
Mhm.
And it wasn't that people weren't willing to pay it. They just weren't willing to pay it so often.
Sure. Wow, fascinating.
Yeah.
So circling back to Uno Mas, you started to say that you learned some lessons from High Tide that led to Uno Mas. How does that work?
Yeah. So we needed my lease is still active,
At the Wonder
for-
Building.
at the
Yeah.
Wonder Building,
Yeah.
as well as in the Numerica building. And so we needed to find something to go in there
Sure.
that was an everyday item that guests would come and try. With the podium just opening up and the arena, we were looking at what is something that people love to eat all the time, and
Sure.
tacos was an easy sell
Yeah.
on that. Ethan Stoll just recently changed Bosco, which is the pasta restaurant inside of the Wonder Building next to us, to Victory Burger.
Yeah.
And by doing that, he's already found far more success because it just played into what the demographic in that area for concerts and events and the park was really looking for.
Sure.
And so we're kind of following suit in that direction. Hello Sugar was consolidating their efforts from 3 locations down to 2 locations.
Sure. And that's the space you're going into in the valley. Correct?
Exactly. Yeah. And so we partnered up with Ramsey and Amy from Hello Sugar and Travis from TT's
Mhm.
as a group to first launch the one in the valley. But it looks like we're going to be launching both of them almost at the same time.
At the same time.
Yeah.
Sure. So does Uno Mas come with more predictable food costs at this time, or?
Absolutely.
Mhm.
I mean, they're commodity items.
Sure.
So chicken, pork, beef.
Yeah.
Depending on what recipe we're doing, if we're doing beef barbacoa, we don't necessarily have to do brisket. We don't have
Sure.
to do this really tender muscle. We can use a harder muscle that costs less money.
Sure.
We can still prepare it the same way that we would do any expensive piece of meat.
Right.
Smoke it over a long period of time, get a lot of flavor into it, and
Sure.
then braise it. And now we have this really delicious,
Yeah.
shredded beef style dish. And the same thing goes with carnitas. We already got the pulled pork game down at TT's. Now let's add some Mexican flavor to it, and then we can do a smoked carnitas, which is a little bit different, right? So
Yeah.
if you're thinking campestre out in the country, you're likely cooking over fire.
Sure.
So introducing those smoky flavors, I think,
Yeah.
is going to really elevate it.
Yeah. That sounds good.
But yeah, everyday food, right? Tacos are usually inexpensive. The
Sure.
meats that go in tacos aren't extremely expensive.
Right.
So keeping lobster out of the tacos for now.
Do you see a day where the lobster roll concept comes back?
Absolutely. I not patented it, but I licensed it. I went through all the IP legal
The
side
High
of
Tide
things.
name.
Exactly. The brand marks, all that stuff. I think that it is a very a really fun concept that
Sure.
could go anywhere across the country, especially the way we built it in these small kiosks.
Sure.
But there's that thing in the back of your mind, like, how long until lobster prices go back up, or how long till they go back down?
Sure.
So this may be something I end up building up and getting started and then selling it off, or it may be something that I take and run with it again.
Sure.
But the unpredictability of it, and the cost burden
Right.
from having to close the restaurant,
Right.
not necessarily something I want to continue to go through.
Sure.
So I may play it a little bit safer next time.
I wonder if there's and I'm getting way off track here, but I just wonder if there's something that you could pair it with to offset it a little bit.
I think there's a seafood restaurant concept that
Yeah.
can have a lobster roll on it.
Right.
That's not the only thing. Because
Sure.
one of the things that, we talked about of why the concept didn't work so well was, regardless of all the things that I put on the menu, which I found to be very delicious. And some
Sure.
people came to the restaurant not for lobster ever. They came for the short rib roll with the horseradish mayo. They came for the spicy mushroom roll. Those are all very delicious. So we tried to pivot and create the ultimate roll,
Mhm.
and then a shrimp roll and a crab roll, to try to find a way
To try to diversify the menu. Sure.
exactly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
people could still get really good seafood roll for the price that they were willing to pay.
Yeah.
But the truth was, is people would walk up and there was 2 types of individuals.
Yeah.
One would say, no, I came here for lobster and I'm going to pay that price.
Right.
And the other one was, no, I came here for lobster and I'm not going to pay that price.
Right.
And then we leave. Right. So it was like, but you got to try this. It's so amazing. And it's at a better price. And we did what we could to,
Yeah.
to try to meet the needs, and the needs weren't met. And so we had to make the call we made.
Okay. So if you're keeping score at home, what we've got now is Una Moss going into the Wonder Building
Yes,
and the South Valley off of South Dishman Micah Road.
correct.
Down the street from another one of your restaurants, which is TT's Barbecue.
Yes,
And then we also have Zona Blanca, which is downtown
yes, on Howard Street.
on Howard Street. Okay. Which building is it in on Howard Street?
It's in the
I should-
Holly Mason.
Oh, it is in the Holly
building.
Mason. Is it in the old Rocket Bakery?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
I know where
So we have a
you're
nice
talking
patio that we just finished building out. It doesn't feel like you're in Spokane at
Yeah.
all. It's a really exciting space. The music is great. The colors, the flavors, all of it kind of take you on a mini vacation every time
Yeah.
you walk in our doors.
Good, good, good. And that's the concept that you had at the old
It was a steel barrel tap room.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The
Yeah, we started there. It was
brewery
only,
incubator, right?
correct. Yeah, which is where TT's got their start.
right, right.
So we're very thankful for Chris Batten and allowing us to operate in the Lumen area
Good.
and kind of giving us a head start for some success.
For where you're at now.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Well, I have more questions for Chad, of course, but if you have your own, there's a question function in the chat. Go ahead and ask it. And once we're done, we'll get to your questions. Look forward to those. It's interesting that you mentioned chicken as one of the ingredients with the tacos, of course, obviously. But I remember that about a year ago, we did a story about rising food costs. And one of the things, we had a graphic that showed, I think chicken wings had tripled in price over the course of 2 months or something. I don't remember the exact time.
Still very high chicken wings. Yeah.
Something like
Yeah.
that.
Chicken wings and chicken tenders are, they're not the commodity anymore.
Yeah. And so what are you still seeing in terms of volatility in food prices, and where do you see it going in the coming months?
So I don't think that we're going to slow down
Mhm.
anytime soon in watching our food continue to inflate.
So it's not volatility, it's just going up.
It's just going up right
Okay.
now.
Okay.
We just got emails from multiple vendors that said we're going to have 10 to 15% markups on everything starting in the next 2 to 3 weeks.
Sure.
And that has just continued to happen, every quarter.
Yeah.
And it's making it difficult.
Sure.
So looking at some of those more cost, effective items and trying to make those really delicious is kind of the direction that we're trying to go down.
Right.
The less process there is to an animal, the less expensive it is.
Sure.
Right. So a chicken wing, you only get so many wings out of a bird, right?
Right.
And then the rest of that bird has to be utilized in other areas.
Sure.
More cuts on that bird, more hands, more packaging, right? So if you think about that, if you even just want the little tiny wings and not the drumettes,
Mhm.
you're going to probably pay more in the grocery store for that.
Sure.
So what we look at is how do we buy a whole bird and just cut it in half and throw it on the smoker?
Sure.
And that brings our cost down quite a bit.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. Any sense for where it's going? I mean, when you're going to stop seeing these increases in cost, and what needs to happen for that?
I think we can all speculate on the reason why the costs have gone up. Labor
Sure.
pool was a really big one.
Right.
We saw it mostly within seafood because fishermen didn't have to go to work, right? They were able to get government money to
Sure.
stay back. And those who were fishing were able to talk to the dock or talk to the captains and say, this is how much you have to pay us. We're the
Yeah.
only ones that are willing to work. This is what you're going to pay.
Yeah.
And of course, then those expenses get passed on to the consumer. We're still seeing that as an issue. Our purveyors, the rotation of staff is rapid right now.
Right.
I feel like I'm on a phone call with my purveyors almost weekly saying, hey, our delivery hasn't arrived yet. And they're like, oh, our good driver is on vacation or went to a different company. And now we're trying to train these people up. And it's just like, it's a revolving door right now. And we see it a little bit in the restaurant. We've been really lucky to build such a loyal team that has
Right.
stuck around.
Yeah.
85% is probably the number I would say that has stuck with us since we've opened our doors.
Oh, that sounds enviable.
It's great.
Mhm.
But then that other 15-20% is the one that's like rapidly rotating.
Sure.
Um,
Sure.
And you can just tell the difference in what people are looking for in our industry specifically. I think people just learned like this is a really tough work environment.
Right.
We're moving, and often we don't feel appreciated. And I necessarily feel that way. I feel like for the
Sure.
most part, I mean, I'm a servant, right?
Right.
Like, I enjoy serving people. I
Right.
enjoy interacting with them. And my greatest success is watching somebody take a bite of something, have a smile on their face, or
Yeah.
tell me that their server treated them great.
Yeah. It's all about that experience.
But not every
Yeah.
restaurant operates the way we do. They don't have
Sure.
the same culture that we've built. And you can see the people leaving very quickly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So your experience with your own employees hasn't been as prohibitive as the experience of some of the companies that you rely upon.
yeah, we had a couple, months where it was really difficult for us
Sure.
trying to find the key people
Right.
that we needed on our team to deliver the message and the quality of product that we wanted to provide.
Right.
But I think there's a lot of restaurants out there. I mean, I've talked to a lot of business
Right.
owners, and they're like, man, I can't find anyone.
Yeah.
And we went through some periods where people would walk through the door, and our thought process was, all right, these guys are just coming to an interview and applying so they can continue getting unemployment.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of an unfair assessment,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
Or an assumption. But it kept happening. It kept happening. It kept happening where they would walk in and they'd say, well, I really only want to work 2 days a week.
Right.
Or I need to work 3 days a week, and it's every other day, and 1 day is in the morning, 1 day is in the evening. Or I would have somebody that worked for me for 2 weeks and be like, oh, I made enough money. I just want to work like 15 hours a week.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, I hired you as a full-time employee.
Right.
I really need you on our team. Like, you're valuable to us. And
Sure.
and it wasn't important to them. And for me, I'm going like, how do you survive living off of
Right.
that? And then I have other stuff that are like, I'm not making enough money.
Right.
And so it's hard to know what's real and what's not real. And
Yeah.
labor pool is hard right now.
Yeah. Has that stabilized a little bit though?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. We're
Okay.
getting to a better place. I think we've got a ways to go. I mean,
Mhm.
our restaurants aren't full yet.
Yeah.
People are still, slowly trickling out.
Sure.
I mean, we've seen an increase. We're in spring break,
Mhm.
which is kind of like a tough time for restaurants in general.
Okay. Yeah.
So in the next 4 to 6 weeks, we should see restaurants really start packing their doors.
As it gets warmer and the days get longer.
Exactly. Yeah. But spring break is kind of that little kick.
Yeah.
You think it's going to be great, but if you're not in Fort Lauderdale or Cabo, people are traveling to warmer weather.
Sure.
So,
Sure.
yeah.
I wanted to ask you about something I noticed as a consumer, but I noticed it as a consumer, but I began thinking about it from a business perspective right away as soon as I saw it. So something you did at TT's, and I think you're still doing at times, is you would put up posts on social media where you'd say, we're making this type of sandwich, we're making a finite number, and they're going to be available at this time. And then you would sell out of those very quickly. Could you kind of, and I thought it was I thought it was interesting from a business standpoint. I liked it as a consumer too, but I thought it was interesting from a business standpoint because you're controlling costs. You're controlling costs. You're going to have a defined margin on those, most likely, within a pretty small range.
Mhm.
And so talk to me about how that came up and how that's worked for you.
Well, so some of it was just out of sheer creativity, right? We
Sure.
want to do something different. A lot of our restaurants menus inherently are kind of like, this is what we do, and
Right.
we get bored. And so we often are trying to be creative, but then we're like, hey, how do we provide a weekly special that
Sure.
might drive certain traffic on days that are really light?
Right.
So Thursday, historically at TT's has always been, just kind of day.
Okay. All right.
Right.
Yeah.
Like,
sure.
it's like, I don't know, like that could have been way better.
Yeah.
So we decided to do our burger Thursdays.
Okay.
And to what you said, we would pick the amount of burgers that we'd want to cook that we think that we would sell out of.
Sure.
Because if we are only doing burgers on Thursday, what do we do with all that ground beef the next day?
Right.
And we also looked at it from the standpoint of we have all this trim with our brisket
Yeah.
that just goes into the trash can.
Mhm.
How do we turn that trash into cash?
Right.
Right. And so ground beef. And some of the stuff you can't really grind up. It's not great, but like a lot of
Sure.
it is, right. And the more fat, the better, the more flavor, all of that. So we would essentially say, we're going to do 60 burgers. We know this is all that we're going to do. We're not going to prep any more than that. We know we need this many buns, we need this much pickles and all of that. And then we tell people on social media. And there is this thing, I think what the cool kids call FOMO, fear of missing out. And it's a marketing tool,
Sure,
right? You
sure.
you build hype about an item. We may talk about it 2 days before. I may take a video, and today I did a video. I've ate 16 TT's burgers this year because we're at the 16th week. And every Thursday, people can tune in and watch me eat the burger and talk about it.
Yeah.
And it drives awareness and attention to it. And in some instances, if the burger is really popular on social media, we may sell out in a matter of 2 or 3 hours.
Sure.
And then there's other days where, maybe it's a rainy day, maybe people are out of the lake, we may not even sell out of burgers.
Right.
But we tried to drive that, like, you have to have this sandwich.
Sure. Sure.
And I feel like it's worked.
Yeah.
Or like, Tuesday's a family pack day.
Mhm.
We do 2 pounds of smoked chicken, 4 buns, 2 different sides. And for, $35, you can come pick up this meal and feed a family of 4. So there's a value added proposition.
Sure.
Um,
Do those have a finite number as well? Like, or
they
is that more of
started
a-
that
okay.
way.
Okay.
But the chicken has been so popular lately that we've just left it on the
Sure.
menu in general.
Right.
But like our cheesesteaks on Saturdays, right?
Yeah,
We do
yeah.
not a traditional cheesesteak. It is a smoked brisket cheesesteak with
Sure.
a sauce that we make and onions that we cook down in smoked
Yeah.
beef tallow.
Sure.
But 100 cheesesteaks on Saturday, and we usually sell out within 3 to 4 hours.
Sure.
But we kind of treat it also as like seasonal,
Mhm.
like the McDonald's
Like the Shamrock Shake or
the
the
Shamrock
McRib.
Shake or the McRib. Exactly. Right. So we let a half a year go by and we don't do the cheesesteak, and then we bring it back. And I think when we started the cheesesteak 4 weeks ago, we sold out of 100 in under an hour.
Okay.
So,
All right.
there's a
Yeah.
line outside, makes you want to puff your chest up, feel really good about yourself. We're not getting that exact same attention right now.
Sure.
It tends to taper off and kind of hit like a plateau. We know
Right.
like, all right, eventually we're only going to do 60 sandwiches and it'll last the entire day.
Right.
But we like to build that buzz and,
Sure.
talking about marketing and getting people's attention, we're all standing on top of our buildings with a microphone screaming at the
Right.
world saying, come through our doors.
Sure,
Right? And this is
sure.
why you should come.
Yeah.
And we're trying to use those tools as much as we can.
Yeah. That's great. That's great. Just a couple more
Mhm.
questions, and then we'll get to what the audience has over here. I'm curious to know, I wanted to ask more of a consumer-like question
Mhm.
about trends in the industry. And where do you see, specifically in our market, opportunity or more things happening?
Well, where the trends are going isn't necessarily where I want them to go.
Okay.
Right.
Sure.
Where I want them to go is, smaller restaurants focusing on their core thing.
Sure.
Right. And executing it really well.
Sure.
But what we're really starting to see is more fast casual restaurants, which Spokane historically has had a lot of.
Okay.
Right.
Sure.
And why? There's a lot of families here.
Sure.
And it's about convenience, right? It's not
Right.
about poor choices and eating fatty foods. It's
Right.
about, I got to get Johnny to soccer practice, and
Right.
Sally to violin practice, and somehow I got to get this filling put in,
Yeah.
right? And I got to have dinner ready at this time, right?
Sure.
And so it's become a thing of convenience for people. And so you're starting to see these ghost kitchens or
Right.
dark kitchens
Yeah.
where you have, let's say, a large facility that has multiple restaurants in it
Yeah.
that don't actually service the customer as a walk-up base, but only through Uber Eats or DoorDash,
Sure.
which is really expensive for the consumer. So
Sure.
for me, I don't understand how it continues to go.
Right.
Because we've probably all ordered a McDonald's cheeseburger off of Uber Eats and it gets to your door and you're like, this is a $40 burger. You know what I mean? And you eat that thing as slow as you possibly can. But I think that's what I'm seeing is
Sure.
these trends,
Yeah.
that direction. It's convenience. And I hope that that's kind of a fad and it stabilizes. I think
Sure.
there's a need there. But I really hope as a consumer that we start to see these like smaller pocket restaurants. You got Peace Pie, you
Right.
know, in the Saranac Commons that is,
Sure.
you know, really, really good. You've got Little Noodle that opened up and it's like a micro restaurant. You got Gordy's on the South Hill. It's
Right.
a micro restaurant. They do
Yeah.
an amazing job, you know, even like with Victory Burger and some of those smaller places. I think that's what we need. And we're starting to see more and more ethnic restaurants
Right.
come here, specifically more in the downtown area, which is typically where you find those.
Right.
You know, Feast Kitchen,
Fantastic.
amazing, constantly rotating new foods. I mean, you could eat there every night of the week and feel like you're at a different restaurant every night.
Sure.
And I think those are the things that I would love to see happen, but may not necessarily be.
Sure. I wonder if there's some sort of hybrid with the ghost kitchen, and I'm just talking right now, but where you combine what you were talking about doing on social media with that ghost kitchen concept where you're I don't know, picking up at a pop-up location or something along those lines. Is that something we've seen?
I mean, I think that's food trucks
Oh,
in
yeah.
general, right?
Yeah, I'm describing food trucks.
Yeah.
Sure.
And they're great. I love eating
Yeah.
at food trucks.
Sure.
And from a convenience standpoint and like this like white rhino standpoint,
Sure.
right? Like you don't know where they're going to be. You got to wait for them to post something and you got to chase it down. And for some people, they probably think that's annoying.
Yeah.
But for me, I'm always on a food mission, right? And my
Sure.
food missions usually take me outside of the country,
Uh-huh.
where finding those type of experiences are really what I'm looking for. It's less
Sure.
of the Michelin star restaurants. And don't get me wrong,
Right.
I
right.
love those, but
Yeah.
it's the food stall that's hidden behind this tire shop in the barrio, you know, that
Yeah.
I'm really looking for.
Right. Oh, that's
So-
great. That's great. Well, let's see if we have any questions yet. Any questions for Chad?
Yeah, we have two so far, both from Mike McBride. Thanks, Mike, for joining us again today. Hold on here. We got first question is, the Spokane restaurant scene is becoming more adventurous in the last few years, but what concepts would you like to see Spokane eaters get to try that don't exist here yet? I know you've talked a little bit about that.
Good question.
Yeah, great question. So some concepts that I would love to see here in Spokane is like a real Korean barbecue, right? Where they bring you platters of thinly sliced meats, and they have a cooktop at the table, and they bring all these different things, vegetables and meats, and you grill it right there in front of you. There's a lot of those when I lived in San Diego on a street called Convoy, and you know, I think more ethnic restaurants are going to be great for us. More kebab shops. You know, trying to get a gyro on the street here is difficult. A lot of them are sit-down restaurants, and so if we can find individuals to open these micro restaurants, you don't have to spend $175,000 to $250,000 to open a restaurant. You could spend 35 and open up in a really small space, and we have a lot of those spaces in Spokane. And I really hope we can start seeing that, more ramen shops popping up. You know, I think that's where I'd like to eat.
Good. And another question from Mike. Also, can you talk about your experience and what it was like being a contestant and judged on Top Chef?
Wow. Well, so Top Chef was a really exciting experience. And it's not all good and it's not all bad, right? Go again. All right. Yeah. So Top Chef was a lot of fun. We did our season was interesting. We were sequestered. So we were traveling season. We were traveling from different cities throughout California. And so we would get locked into our hotel rooms and spend lots of time getting to know our roommate, if you will. And then all of a sudden we'd be rushed out of our rooms, hidden from any kind of publicity in Los Angeles or wherever we were at in California, and then onto set. And sometimes it would be immediately we're going to quick fire a challenge and we're having to figure out what we need to do really fast. And then other times we may be sitting in the back lot of a studio area waiting for, 3 or 4 hours in 90-degree weather on concrete, waiting for the sound crew and the film crew and the production team to figure out what they were doing or work through mishaps that happened on the set. So it was constant stress. And some of us were like, oh, they're doing this on purpose. They're trying to stress us out. They want to make this competition a little bit more, more vibrant for like ratings. But it was high stress. It was high stakes. And the people that I was competing against were insanely talented. At the time I owned 5 restaurants. I thought I was, pretty hot dog on the deal. And then I'm hearing Padma and Tom name off these people, multiple James Beard Award winners working for Thomas Keller and Charlie Palmer and working at 11 Madison Park with Daniel Hume, these Michelin starred restaurants. And I was like, I all of a sudden don't stand a chance. And the first thing I just thought was, man, I absolutely cannot be the first person to go home. And I feel like I fared pretty well. I got off the show unscathed in the top 10. So, but it was a wild experience, to say the least.
Well, no more audience questions. I can ask one additional question. You talked a little bit about different kinds of restaurants that we could use now, but what about geography? Are there places around Spokane, neighborhoods around Spokane that you believe are underserved?
Yeah, I mean, I think South Hill, I feel, is really underserved right now. I mean, we have some new restaurants that are opening up on the South Hill. I believe there's 2 barbecue restaurants that are going to be opening up. But I'd really like to see, just as somebody who lives on the hill, I would love to have more options. And I love the options that we do have, but more would be great. And I think, the Valley is continuing to grow. It's becoming a little bit more of a hot spot for people opening up restaurants. There's a lot of real estate available. But man, Hilliard's kind of making some noise right now. There's a new restaurant up there called Kismet, and the owner of Market Street Pizza is opening up another restaurant up there. And they're just doing some pretty cool things. And I think Hilliard could be, it's looking like they're trying to make it a little bit like the Spokane Design District on Sprague area,
Mm-hmm.
And if we can pack those with restaurants, I think that's going to be really cool. So
we did get one more question from Natasha Nellis. Hi, Natasha. On the topic of ghost kitchens, do you have any concerns about quality control and that having an impact on a restaurant's reputation that could drive away foot traffic?
Well, I think a ghost kitchen definitely that can be a challenge. And I'm sure that there are operators who have a great set of ethos and want to have great quality in what they're producing. And then there's probably some who are just trying to make a buck and doing what they need to do. And I don't think that changes either from ghost kitchen or brick and mortar restaurant. I obviously less customers coming in and seeing your space could mean that the space is not kept at a hygienic standard, but we leave that up to our health department to manage, and I feel like they do a really good job. And I feel like most restaurants you're definitely safe, but I can totally see the concern.
All right, I'm getting hungry.
Me too. It's almost dinner time.
Yeah, let's go eat. Well, thank you for joining us today.
Wow.
Chad, thanks for the great
My
conversation.
pleasure. Absolutely.
Fantastic.
Thanks for having me.
Please join us again next month when Chris Patterson will be with us from Hello for Good, to talk about business's role in homelessness. Until then, stay safe and we'll see you soon.